You are listening to ESG News and Views from the Conference Board.
Hello, this is Jeff Hoffman, Institute Leader of Corporate Citizenship and Philanthropy here at the Conference Board's ESG Center. The ESG Center focuses on corporate citizenship, sustainability, and corporate governance. Welcome to our fourth and concluding installment of our special series focusing on how the novel coronavirus is impacting the global south. In past episodes, we focused on how the pandemic is affecting and how companies are responding in Africa, Latin America, and India. Today, we'll be focusing its impact in Kuwait and throughout the Gulf region. I'm delighted to be joined by our guest, Bassam Alfili, Director of Innovation and Enterprises at the Kuwait Foundation for the Advancement of Science, or KFAS, and Zain, a leading telecommunications company and the first mobile telecommunications company in the Middle East and Africa. We're joined by Jenny Solomon, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer for the Zain Group, and Malik Hamoud, who is Chief Investment and Digital Officer for the Zain Group. So welcome to all of you today. In this fourth series that we're doing, we want to continue our look on how COVID-19 is having an effect on the particular regions of the world, our companies, both how it's affecting them operationally, their employees, and what the companies are doing to help society at large. We know various regions of the world, various countries and parts of the countries are actually feeling the effects of the pandemic in different ways. And we also know, besides COVID-19, there are other things that continue to go on that have an impact. I mean, for instance, we all have seen the terrible explosion that took place in Beirut, Lebanon, and that is straining an already strained healthcare and hospital system. So that's something that we all need to be cognizant of, that, the pandemic is not the only thing that is happening out there in the world, and whether it be other types of disasters or conditions at any point, we could be having to look at multiple issues that we're all facing. So we want to get right into what is taking place throughout the region. Bassam, let's start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about your role at KFAS?
Okay, I would like to first thank ESG News and Views for inviting me to be part of this podcast series. I'm very honored and privileged to be virtually here today with our host Jeff and my fellow panelists Jenny and Malik from Zain Telecom. If you allow me, before I respond to your question, I would like to briefly mention something about KFAS, or the Kuwait Foundation for Advancement of Science. It is a private, not-for-profit organization established in 1976 to promote science, technology, and innovation in Kuwait, and also to encourage its utilization for addressing national challenges, also a better quality of life and sustainable future for the Kuwaiti people. Just as an example, KFAS initiated and funded several pilot projects to stimulate and accelerate the use of solar energy for electrical power generation, in addition to raising public awareness about these technologies. This is mainly to reduce Kuwait's dependence on oil and minimize the negative environmental effects of burning fossil fuels. KFAS is actually a result of collective corporate citizenship from major corporations in Kuwait. I should highlight that corporate citizenship is not something new in Kuwait. It is being practiced in part through KFAS for over 43 years now. Therefore, everything I'm going to mention today is actually collective corporate citizenship from all shareholding companies in Kuwait, both publicly listed and closed companies. So even my colleagues at Zain, they can say, in addition to what KFAS has done on our behalf, we did this and that. So back to your question about the pandemic and the resulting economic crisis in the region. I would like to say that the region quickly reacted and took serious measures to slow the spread of COVID-19 by limiting the movement of people. The strict containment measures implemented in the very early stages of the outbreak have proven efficient in limiting the spread of the pandemic in the region. Luckily, infection and mortality rates are not as bad as initially anticipated. Also, the pandemic is causing dramatic economic costs, especially with both negative demand and supply shocks, and also shock from the collapse of oil prices. We have seen economic output fall in various sectors of the non-oil economy due to lockdowns. Gulf countries in general mainly provided monetary stimulus, but they were restrained by budgetary deficits, so it varied from country to country. Other measures were also provided, like wage benefits to companies, utility subsidies, also suspension of some government taxes and fees, exemption of rent and loan payments, also salaries to quarantined migrant laborers. The private sector also took active role in supporting government initiatives. And I'll leave it to my fellow panelists from Zain to give some examples with that.
Great. Thank you, Bassem. That was very interesting. And the work that you do at KFOS really is so revolutionary in many ways and so forward thinking. So, from Zane, we do want to hear about the corporate response, but first, maybe a little bit, tell us about how the pandemic has affected your internal operations across your businesses in the 8 regions that you are, how you've quickly adapted to support your employees working from home, what were some of the learnings and the challenges along the way.
Okay, so with regard to KFAS, and starting from mid-March, we launched the Emergency Resilience Program in response to COVID-19. Around $30 million were dedicated for this program. And the aim of this program is to support government efforts in the areas of education, public health, and business resilience, as well as to also engage civil societies in increasing public awareness to reduce the spread of the virus and to mitigate its effects on society. As one would expect in such crisis, the majority of our effort went to health sector for the purpose of helping frontline workers, provide studies to back decision making, and encourage the local manufacturing sector to play a bigger role in meeting the need for medical supplies that could be manufactured locally. To give some examples, actually half of the 30 million already used to purchase medical devices as well as personal protective equipment, PPEs, to provide protection to the frontline staff. KFAS carried out public awareness events and created even an international panel of experts in public health to support decision-making process with international best practices. Another thing KFAS did supported scientific research and practical innovations. by funding research to develop local COVID-19 diagnostic kit, as well as carry SARS-2 virus sequencing and genetic characterization of the full-length genome in Kuwait, and these were published. Also supported local researchers to create projection models to inform policymaking on the spread of the virus in Kuwait. Also supported training of a wide range of medical staff on safety practices while taking care of COVID-19 patients. Uh, Also, with full closure of schools and universities, addressing education situation was also another focus of KFAS. So we established cooperation with the Ministry of Education to develop a national transformation initiative for electronic education and distance learning. Uh, we identified reliable digital education platforms and assess their quality, especially with the content, just to make sure that we're providing reliable content to the students. We also provided free access to informal and supplementary education spanning K through 12. Another thing, provided open access to a collection of Arabic or foreign translated educational digital content covering various fields of science and knowledge to all Arabic readers around the world. So this platform is open and accessible to anybody from around the world, where they can read some content originally written in Arabic, or it has been translated from other languages to Arabic. Another thing, addressing the economic repercussions of the pandemic was also an important area to focus on. The goal is to enable the private sector companies to navigate through this crisis and overcome the economic preconcussions of the pandemic. The approach was to collect and or generate knowledge that could help the private sector maintain business continuity and to navigate through such time of uncertainty. There were three main streams that we worked on, and they are one is knowledge enhancement, and with this, our goal was to produce or publish reports, newsletters, online talks on the current state of economy in Kuwait, looking at the sector level issues, also making available trends, some data analysis. And here our objective is to help the private sector make more informed decisions. This is, of course, not new intervention to KFAS. I mean, KFAS uh, supported the establishment of the Conference Board Gulf Center in Kuwait a couple of years back, because we do recognize the importance of knowledge during both good and bad times. And another stream was also focusing on learning and human development. So we're looking at the human capital in the private sector, and we provided free at no cost to companies or the employees online courses and talks on business continuity, crisis management, and adapting to new work styles. Here, our goal is to help companies stay in business and adapt to the current work constraints. The third stream was focused on technological development. And here we wanted to encourage companies to adopt new technological solutions by providing financial grants. The goal here is to help companies survive this crisis and encourage them to increase their capabilities to support national needs. So continuing in our role as an enabler or and promoter of technological solutions, KFAST issued in April a special calls for practical solutions that addresses the implication of COVID-19 on the national food security and supply chain disruption. as well as business automation, robotics, and artificial intelligence. So this is similar to the solar energy project that we have done in the past. The goal here is to encourage and accelerate the adoption of new technology solutions and or adaptation of more mature technologies proven elsewhere to Kuwait conditions through funding of pilot projects. Then use the pilot projects to demonstrate and showcase the capabilities and limitations of such applied solutions to the concerned entities. In other words, the data generated from these pilot projects will serve as a sound supporting evidence to the practicality of the solution under real Kuwait conditions. And it would be left to the user judgment to determine the suitability of the solution to their need. Also, KFAS organized a virtual hackathon to encourage the local talent to develop beta digital solutions, basically functional prototypes that address challenges faced by entities, whether they're governmental or private, in Kuwait during the coronavirus pandemic. The targeted beneficiaries of the solutions are entities that have been impacted by the crisis and have an immediate need for such solutions. So these are some of the examples that we have undertook to contribute to the national needs in such difficult times.
Impressive how you were able to quickly pivot utilizing what your normal role at KFAS is with enabling and promoting of technology solutions to actually target various aspects of the pandemic and where people are going to need help, whether it be companies, or I was particularly interested in hearing what you were talking about with distance learning and the platforms and the work you were doing around supplementing education and the informal aspects of education, because that has been one of the biggest challenges I know many have faced around the world, is how do you keep schools and the education process continuing to move forward. So thank you for sharing all of that with us and the three main points that you have been focusing on. Bassam, you had mentioned business continuity, and I think that might be a good transition over to our friends at Zain, because being in the telecommunications world, obviously that business continuity is critical, but at the same time, the employees of Zain are going through the pandemic and how it is affecting everything from, if you have children and you talk about distance learning, to how you go to work or you don't go to work. So, Zain, would you like to talk to us about how the pandemic has affected your company?
Thank you, Jeff, for hosting us. It's really a pleasure to be part of this podcast along our partners, KFAS. And as Bassam mentioned, we are very close to KFAS, and we've been dealing on various initiatives with KFAS. First of all, you mentioned earlier in the podcast about the unfortunate event that happened in Beirut, and I would like to pass our greetings to our colleagues in Beirut. It's one of the countries where we operate, and we know how tough these times are. Going back to COVID-19 and the impact of COVID-19, COVID-19 I believe that it was a wake-up call for everyone, not only for the telecom industry, it's pretty much for everyone. Whether you look at it from a professional perspective, from a personal perspective, we had to take a step back and look at how we live, how we operate, how we manage our businesses, how we interact, how we travel. So, and that, of course, basically was an eye opener on our business itself. It had an impact on the business, of course. Many people believe that telecom industry was safe from COVID, but when you look at the facts on the ground, there are many factors that had an impact. Yes, it's not as bad as the entertainment industry or the airline industry or the retail industry, but still the impact was relatively there. Our reaction, of course, when we looked at the impact of COVID and how we should we took a series of actions. And among these, basically, was to look at internal actions as well as external actions. As a large operator, as you know, we operate in 8 different countries in the Middle East and North Africa. These markets are very, very different. And this by itself is a challenge because the reaction and what you do on the ground is really defined by one, the nature of the business on the ground, the reaction of the government itself. So in some countries we had total lockdown for a long period of time. In some countries were partial lockdown. Some countries didn't do much. So really the reaction that we had was really, we had that holistic approach, but in every single operation, we had to take different measures. And as you can imagine, our stakeholders are many. It's not only the internal stakeholders, our employees, but it's also our customers, our suppliers. So basically the whole ecosystem where we operate. And we had to take many, many measures.
Very interesting, especially I think what caught my attention there is what you said about having a holistic approach, but then having to localize because you're right, the 8 countries you operate in are very, very different. The governments are different, the demographics are different within the regions. So, and then obviously the supply chain aspect is something that we don't initially think about, but obviously is really critical to how you maintain your business. Jenny, switching over to your area in looking at the sustainability and the community aspect, and Malik had mentioned. Various stakeholders. So how have you looked at that within Zane and the initiatives, looking at your stakeholders and society overall?
Well, it's a great pleasure to be here. First of all, Zane has always had very close links with the communities in which it operates. So we have been, I would say that since inception, we have always have this close relationship because we understood very well that for a company to flourish, then society needs to flourish as well. Now, looking at the various needs, so of course, as Malik mentioned previously, the uniqueness of the market, and then looking at, for example, what is the most essential need at the moment of the crisis. So obviously, we work with the various government institutions, whether it was the ministries of health, the ministries of education, the regulators, to see what is it that the company, what's the most essential need. Obviously, it hit in the middle of the school year, so you didn't want to interrupt the educational activities of the society. So we made sure that we, for example, in some of our markets, we gave 0 rating, so the students could access the governmental educational platforms. The same thing with the health platforms in a way that you continue to have some sort of continuity. We did obviously relief work when needed, and so that was done in conjunction with government entities as well to make sure that the distribution was done in the best possible way. So this is one of the things that we maintain. We obviously continue to engage with people. We made sure that we were very active in all our social media platforms to make sure that we talk to our diverse stakeholders. And this way we continue to promote awareness, education. We use obviously the network, like the traditional routes of SMSs to keep them informed. One of the things that we did in Kuwait, we wanted to make sure that we were very inclusive because Kuwait is a market that's very diverse. So we made sure that we work with the Ministry of Interior, we work with the Ministry of Health to promote messages in, for example, in Urdu or in Tagalog, in the different languages of the different demographics that we have in Kuwait, because it is about making sure that everyone is included, that the message can get across, because one way of addressing the pandemic is doing it together. So this is some of the things, some of the activities that we went ahead and we rolled out. There was a lot of the relief work, for example, in making sure that in Kuwait, for example, there were areas when we did the total curfew. So we worked with the food bank to do food distribution in areas where it was less accessible, where less prosperous, to make sure that everybody had access to food. We also made sure that we increased the data coverage as well, the packages, for a period of 1 month, so people wouldn't be disconnected. So it's how the company looks at its role, that part of the social contract, basically, that the company has in its markets of operation. So the alignment that Malik mentioned was that we all agreed that, for example, health and safety, the welfare not only of the employees, but of course of the community as well, that everybody was aligned, that our risk department also was looking at not only the risks, but the business continuity aspect as well. And we also set in place a crisis committee to make sure that we had a complete oversight of each of our markets, and make sure that we maintain a certain level, so that we can manage, and the business can be managed properly and can continue, and that we protect our stakeholders internally and externally as well.
Jenny, can you tell us who makes up this crisis committee? What are the various roles that are sitting at the table?
So we had human resources. That's very important because it's related to us as well, to our employees. Our risk officer. We had the CEO of operations, we had the CFO as well, we had corporate communications, the chief corporate communications. They were all C-levels, by the way. We had the chief legal counsel, we had sustainability as well, and we had Malik as well included. So basically, like the core that looked at how are we managing this crisis is making sure that the employees was the first focus. When this first started, is like, how do we protect the employees? How do we make sure that the facilities, or not only the offices but the branches, that there is the measures are in place, the disinfectants, making sure that we minimize exposure across the ecosystem.
It's impressive that the committee is actually made up of the chiefs and not a committee that's made up of people who then report into the chiefs. So very interesting. And you touched on employees, and rightfully so. I think that's what most companies will look at first. And then you obviously talked about your social contract that you have with society in general. Have your employees, through your employee volunteer initiatives, been able to do any type of volunteering during the pandemic?
A lot of the employees did. I would say that the biggest efforts were done with the teams, the sustainability teams. But we have to keep in mind that there were the restrictions on the ground. We went into lockdown. So with lockdown, you had to get special permits, okay, to move around. So that's why we collaborated with the agencies that had the ability to move around and distribute food, or make sure that they distribute the SIM cards, or whatever it was, the activity. But it was extremely well thought out, because one of the things that you want to do as a company is, yes, you want to help, but you want to do it in a way that is not risky, that does not expose anyone to possible harm. And since we're the beginning of the pandemic, and the spread was really quickly, we made sure that we did it through specified channels. And there are the ones that have relationships as well. If we're talking about community work, it would be in any of the companies, the sustainability teams that have that direct relationship with the NGOs, with the different players on the ground as well.
Yeah, that has been probably one of the biggest challenges that companies have faced all around the world is their employees really wanting to do something, but the challenges of how do you conduct volunteering, actually hands-on physical type of volunteering during a pandemic and to do it healthy. And at the same time, as you referenced, organizations that operate food banks, etc., are actually needing more helping hands. So it has been an interesting dynamic that we have faced in the corporate volunteering realm. Speaking, though, of challenges, Bassam, I want to go back to you because, obviously, you and KFOS, and then Zane as well, have been having to create these new programs quickly, be reactive to your customer needs, and frankly, also too being very innovative. But you've had challenges along the way. Could you talk a little bit about how you have faced those challenges in executing your initiatives?
Yeah, with total lockdown, curfew, and social distancing, it was very challenging for us to communicate with the stakeholders, to identify their needs, and come up with the right approaches. So we were going in blind with designing interventions, and we're hoping for the best. Also, the situation was developing very quickly, and things were changing sometimes on daily basis. So by the time you think of the initiative and have a plan, then things change. Then you have to change your plan. So it's just having that quick pace made it very challenging. So we had to be very fast and dynamic while adapting to new situation, uh, as well as working remotely from home, because we were all under curfew. So we have to work remotely and try to communicate with each other, brainstorm virtually, and come up with things remotely, and then hope that it will work. Also, as a funding agency, we depend on partners. We're actually small as far as human capital size. In total, we're about 120 people. So we rely heavily on partners such as academic and research institutions to execute our initiatives, and they were under mandatory closure. So it was very difficult for us to do things when our partners were not available to work. Also, some of the beneficiaries of our initiatives were struggling with the lockdown and curfew and social distances, and couldn't pay attention to some of the opportunities that were offered to them. So these are some of the challenges that we faced through this crisis.
Yeah, I think that's probably been one of the biggest challenges for everybody. Again, we're all facing the issues ourselves personally in our daily lives, and when we have organizations, and as you said, your beneficiaries that might be having mandatory closures, how do you work with them? But I also think. What you said is so much of your work is done through partners and collaborations in order to execute. And I think as we talk about silver linings that have come out of the pandemic, I think we've seen many more collaborations than we have seen
Totally.
previously, especially with public private partnerships. So appreciate that. But you also mentioned opportunities. And Malik, I want to go back to you when we talk about these opportunities because you have a interesting role within Zane, being the Chief Investment and Digital Officer, and so much of what you're doing is really looking towards the future. And what opportunities have come out of this pandemic that is going to better position Zane for the future?
Well, very good question, actually. So, moving from challenges, so being surviving COVID itself was a challenge, and we had basically to run fast and change lots of things that we've been doing. So if you look at the core business on the telecom side, we had basically maneuver all the challenges that were there. So from the lockdown to whether it's a full or partial lockdown, inaccessibility of some of customers reaching us. So we had to come up with lots of initiatives and opportunity, and it gave us an opportunity basically to reinvent ourselves in some shape or form. So in most of the market, we had to basically digitalize the way business is conducted. In most of the countries, you will see people are still, especially the prepaid customer base, which is a large base, still going to a shop or a store to buy or recharge their phone. This idea of transacting online was not there. And with the COVID-19, basically, we've seen a change in behavior of most of the customer. We availed and made sure that all the tools are available. The tools were in most of the markets there, but the usage wasn't that high. So that basically, we've seen a surge in the use of basically eSIMs, people buying more and more data through their wallets. And we're talking about wallet. Our wallets in Iraq and Jordan basically grew exponentially. And this also allowed us to expand the market a lot and open up the eyes of the regulators. For example, in those two markets, we managed to convince the financial regulator, the central banks usually, to implement eKYCs so that you can open a wallet while being at home. You can receive your salary straight into that wallet, and you can basically use that wallet to spend. And that's another initiative. The target here is also to move toward a cashless society. And we've heard a lot of most of the countries have that the intention to move into a cashless society. Well, COVID really accelerated that, which is an opportunity by itself. And of course, the fact that we had to find ways on how do we reach out to the customer, because physically it was very difficult. So we started relying more and more on the concept of just go on the e-store, the e-shop, buy whatever, order whatever you need, and we'll deliver it to you at home, and ensure that all the paperwork, if is digitalized as well. So we use a lot of last mile delivery platforms, whether it's ours or third parties, depending on which market we're operating in. In some instances, for example, we had to manage. We had to support the customer base with free data. We had to relax. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of airtime credit. So in some cases, we had to relax airtime credit, where people run out of data or minutes, and they need to, and before the end of the month, and they don't have the cash to do that. So airtime credit solutions were there. So there are many opportunities that we managed to work on. Now, on the topic of education and health was mentioned, and I believe this is very important to talk about. On healthcare, basically, we've supported the Ministry of Health in most of our markets quite heavily in whatever shape or form. But on the digital side, it was an opportunity basically for these governments, especially, for example, in Kuwait, to work closely with the MOH on building solutions and tools to reach out to the patient or the citizen in a digital way. For example, we support the Ministry of Health and various government entities in Kuwait to launch a platform called Shlonik, which is basically "How are you?" in the Kuwaiti slang. And that was a project that we implemented fully in-house with the support of government agencies, and it was launched in basically no time. And that gave a tool basically to the Ministry of Health to monitor the health of thousands of Kuwaitis who flew back to Kuwait and get quarantined. And eventually this platform evolved and became much wider in terms of scope. On the education, we've worked with KFAS a lot, as well as providing to in most of the countries as Jennifer mentioned, zero rating. We had a partnership with Microsoft, specifically on Microsoft Teams. So we came up with creative packages basically for the students that had to stay home and learn virtually. We had lots of packages around availing proper connectivity, the hardware, the software, all in a comprehensive approach. The last thing, which I think is also very important to mention here, is on the SME side. SME is a very hot topic and very sensitive topic. Yes, large corporations do have larger pockets, but they were affected. But the SME is a very different approach. So through our B2B arm, Zen Business, we have supported a lot the SMEs, ensuring that they have the right tools to be able to work from home. So basically the concept of work at home. And that's basically one we tested it internally with our call center, and then decided to avail it as a solution through our partners, whether it was Cisco or Huawei or Microsoft. So we've worked with most of the international companies just to bring the right solution and create that mentality of a one-stop shop through Zen while you are at home. We keep you connected and we provide you with all the tools that you need.
Yeah, I think the examples that you gave are exactly how a company such as yours and what your products are, how you're utilizing your core competencies towards very challenging issues. Whether it be the healthcare act in portion of the pandemic. When you had talked about the education and the connectivity, and then I'm glad you brought up SMEs. I mean, small and medium-sized businesses are critical, and they have various, very different types of infrastructure, or maybe not much infrastructure at all in many cases, in order to conduct business, and really rely on a company such as Zane to get their work done. The other thing you said that I thought was really interesting was reinventing ourselves. And I think a lot of us have been reinventing ourselves during the pandemic and really looking towards the future. And Jenny, I'm wondering if you can touch on the future some, because one of the things that we're seeing is how businesses play a role in bringing about systemic changes in society, and knowing that you are very much focused on sustainability at Zane, and looking at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Can you talk a little bit about how the pandemic has either changed your thinking around sustainability and community investment work, or has it taken what your strategy that you already had in place and potentially accelerated it?
There are great opportunities towards the future, and for us is how do we go about building more inclusive societies, because this is important if we are looking towards the 2030 agenda, the Sustainable Development Goals. It is important, I guess, for businesses in general, especially for a company such as Zane, is to have a greater oversight as well on supply chain management. And within this aspect of ICT and telecommunications and going digital, one of the things that we need to address, and as well, you can put it aside with inclusivity, it is addressing the digital divide. And this is fundamental because we're talking about an opportunity to move forward a society, a region, and so on. Also, I think that one of the things that we don't talk enough about, but we need to really address it, and there is an opportunity. It is also to do more with youth, because if you look at the region where we operate, the MENA region, it has the largest youth bulge. So it is important that we also address them and put them at the center, at the heart of the equation, and so that it is an inclusive, holistic approach on opportunities for the future. This will also allow us, for example, to reinvent products and services that are catered for the youth, but also we need to look at also people with disabilities. How do we make them part of the equation? It's an opportunity for a company to actually do better, do greater. And this is something that we're looking at. And let's not forget about climate change. And the opportunity is how the digital aspect of telecommunications, of when we make all of our channels much more efficient, how does this will lead to reduction in our carbon footprint. And I think this is super important. It is essential that we address it very extensively, so that we don't get into a path that is really hard to deal with. I think those are the most important thing. If we look at the SDGs, they are really ingrained into the fabric of everything we do, and so it is the opportunity to really to address those, but doing business at the same time and doing it holistically and inclusively.
Thanks for that, Jenny. Sadly, we are running towards the end of our time together on this podcast. So I want to give both Zane and Kafos a chance for one last parting comment. So, Malik, why don't we start with you? What would you like the listeners to know going forward from Zane?
Thank you, Jeff. So basically, as we've said, this is yes, it's a global crisis, and the repercussion of it financially will be felt for the month to come. But we have to stay optimistic. We have to look at the future. We have to adapt, as we've said, and really look at things differently. In any challenge, opportunities arise, and we have to come out. And as human beings, I think we are smart enough and agile enough to take the right measures to build a better future.
Yeah, so true, so true. We are agile and we have the opportunity to build a better world. So thank you so much. And Bassam, so appreciate you being on and the work of the Kuwait Foundation for the Advancement of Sciences. So, what words of wisdom do you have for our listeners?
Well, as KFAS mission is to contribute to driving the transformation of Kuwait's economy from resource-based or oil-based economy into more of knowledge-based economy. We see this crisis as an opportunity to engage in a comprehensive reform agenda and address some of the underlying structural issues in Kuwait. While focus should be on rectifying short-term imbalances, long-term structural issues such as promoting entrepreneurship, supporting private sector, and improving business environment should be equally important, and we should not lose sight of that. We also would like to encourage both public and private sector to invest in real transformations and technological innovations. This is very important, especially during this time. This is a great opportunity for us to do that. Also, support the design of new inclusive growth model where we include everybody in the society because we grow together, not separately. So these are the things that we would like to see in the coming days.
Yeah, I think what you said in invest in transformation because we grow together, not separately. I think that is such an important concept to end today on. Jenny and Malik from the Zane Group, Bassam from KFOS, we so appreciate you being with us today to give your perspectives on what is happening with the pandemic in the the Middle East, the Gulf, and in particular Kuwait. It's a crazy time out there, but both of your organizations have really rallied and are doing some amazing work that I think we will see take us forward into the future in a way that I think will work towards, Bassam, your final comments of, going forward together and not separately. So thank you so much. We appreciate your time today. It's been a terrific conversation, and we also want to thank our listeners. Please visit our guest websites to learn a little bit about the initiatives or more about the initiatives that we had discussed today. The links will be available wherever you get your podcasts. And learn more about the conference board as well. We have a specific COVID hub where we have a lot of really good information to help businesses, whether it be through human capital or communications or finance or ESG. And you can find us at www.conference-board.org. So thank you again. We appreciate your participation, and let's all hope that the world learns from this pandemic and we come out of it even stronger. Thank you.
This has been ESG News and Views from the Conference Board.